now. Morning, Mr. McFadden. Let's just start on this, the suspension of the whip for Dianne Abbott. She has apologised. We all know that she, more than anybody else in Parliament, has been subject over years to racist and misogynist abuse herself. She knows these issues very deeply. But yesterday afternoon, the Board of Deputies of British Jews said that the letter was disgraceful and her apology is entirely unconvincing. For Sir Keir Starmer, who has kept Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour family in Parliament, who's determined to show that things have changed on anti-Semitism from those bad years, can Sir Keir Starmer now defy the Board of Deputies and at any point bring Dianne Abbott back into the Parliamentary Labour Party?
Well, Sir Keir Starmer and the Chief Whip had no choice but to take the action that they took yesterday. And you're right what you say about Dianne Abbott and the amount of racism she's received in her life. That's absolutely true, but it can't be a reason to just dismiss what she said in this letter to the newspaper yesterday, because the really sad and wrong thing about it was this shouldn't be a competition. It shouldn't be an attempt to find some sort of hierarchy of racism and how anyone can look at history, not just history of the 20th century, but even in recent times, and say that Jewish people, for example, don't suffer from racism. I simply don't understand. So the Chief Whip and the party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, had no choice but to take the action that they took yesterday. And where we should be striving to get on these issues is not to engage in some competition about one group of people's experience being worse than another, but to try to ensure that we treat everyone with human dignity and that nobody is discriminated against or prejudiced against because of anything to do with race or creed. Now, that's a work in progress. We're not there yet, but that's what we should have learned over history and what we should be striving towards.
Is there anything Dianne Abbott can do now, do you think, to persuade the party leadership that she should be forgiven and allowed to come back into the party? Or in the end, do those words have such power that she can't unsay them or unwrite them?
Well, I assume that Chief Whip will now speak to Dianne Abbott and try to find out what exactly happened here. She said something yesterday about the wrong draft or something like that of the letter, but it's difficult to see how drafting could be the issue here. I haven't seen the different drafts, though maybe there's something in that. But on the face of it, this looks like a problem of conception, not a problem of drafting. And as I say, we should get away from the idea that there's some sort of hierarchy of victims of racism and instead have a common resolve to make sure that everyone is treated on the basis of being a human being and that nobody is discriminated against because of a group or a faith or a race. That's what we've got to try and get to. I don't claim that we're there yet. We're clearly not as a society, but that's what we should all be striving for.
We've only got a minute or two left with you, Pat McFadden. The first thing I want to ask you about is the nurses' strike. It's due to go ahead this weekend. Steve Barclay's threatening legal action because of a technicality over the dates. Do you support the nurses in their continuing strike action?
Well, we never want to see strike action because this strike action is causing delays and cancellation of procedures. It's causing anxiety among the public. So I want to see it resolved as quickly as possible. Now, it looked a couple of weeks ago like we were close to that. We had one union that accepted the pay offer from the government. The RCN didn't vote to accept it. And sometimes, when you get a setback like this, the best thing to do is to knuckle down and resolve to keep going, to try to reach the settlement that I think the public wants to see. I don't think court action will be the way to resolve this. I think it will be resolved around the negotiating table, and that's what we've got to get to. And then once we've done that, we need a longer-term plan for the NHS, because even on a non-strike day, there's 7 million people on the waiting list,
Oh, yes.
and the service
We
isn't
all
operating
we all
as much as
experience
in
that
the way that we
every
would
day.
like
so
to see it.
you back the nurses, even as we know that strike will result in nurses not being in A&E departments.
Look, we don't want to see strike action.
No, nobody wants to see it, but you're backing them this weekend.
Well, that's the word you're using. Obviously, they've got a legal right to do this, but I don't want to see strike action. I want to see this resolved. I want to see the nurses back at work. I want to see them get a decent pay offer, and I want to see the NHS having a long-term plan to tackle the long waiting lists that are there, to try to get the NHS back to operating in a way that the British public want, because the sad truth is that even on a non-strike day, that's not the case.
All right, Pat McFadden, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. Andrew, Kevin.
There's definite move back there from Labour, isn't there?
Yes.
A sharp shift. Wes Streeting, who's the Shadow Health Secretary, said in an interview the other week, I don't support another strike.
But remember, you can go back to Keir Starmer saying no Labour front benchers were allowed to go on picket lines. Remember?
Yeah.
Sam Tarry got sacked, who was a transport spokesman, because he actually did that. So no, Labour's never said they backed the strikes. It's the question of who do you blame? That is it. Why is it happening? And
I think what he was saying was that Pat Cullen wanted a deal.
That's from the
Unison have accepted the deal, and the nurses ought to be put in a position where they can accept the deal.
Yeah, well, I think when there's...
And the question is, does the government give some more?
Yeah, and I'm sure when the next vote takes place, the nurses will vote for it.
I can't remember when a group of workers last overturned their professional negotiators, in this case Pat Cullen at the RCN, and then got a significantly better deal. I just can't remember, because the professional negotiators think it's not absolutely fantastic, it's the best we can get.
Yeah.
Kristin McAnee said that to us, the head of the union last week.
Yeah.
Andrew, Kevin, thank you very much indeed.